This week on fxguidetv.
We go to Animal Logic to discuss the 3D pipeline that allowed them to assemble the new Lego Movie.
This and more coming up next.
Hello, I'm Angie and welcome to fxguidetv. Now, while I would never admit it to my 5-year-old nephew, I had my doubts about the new Lego film. But ever since we saw the first trailer, the Lego Movie by Animal Logic has been gaining momentum. With sharp dialogue and great comic Lego timing, this animated feature is really quite different from most animated films. Mike visited Animal Logic to discuss the complexity of animating block toys to such great comic effect.
Oh my gosh, I love this song!
Everything is awesome. Everything is cool when we're part of the team. Everything is awesome when you're living your dream.
Always use a turn signal. Park between the lines. Yes! Drop off dry cleaning before noon. Read the headlines. Don't forget to smile. Always root for the local sports team.
Go sports team!
Always return a compliment. Hey, you look nice.
So do you.
Drink overpriced coffee.
There you go. That's $37.
Awesome!
So, how did you go about basically designing and blocking and lensing this film?
Well, at the start, we did a lot of research into, I guess one of the big problems that we were trying to solve for an audience is we wanted people to believe that what they were seeing was something real. So we had to do a lot of research into what made stop motion film look real, what's the kind of visual language there, and what that would mean for us. There's also a couple of other things that were surprising when you're shooting minifigs. They have very different proportions to people, so a lot of the rules that you would assume that you could naturally kind of apply in terms of framing were quite different. We had to almost reinvent everything.
Right, so there was a sort of fundamental assumption you're going to film it as if they are true scale and lens as if you were filming something that was just tiny in front of a lens.
Right, exactly. So we basically wanted people to look at the film and go, oh, that's real Lego. And that's, I think we got there. It's pretty good.
So in terms of blocking and setting that sort of stuff up, the characters clearly are restricted in their movement by the nature of being this kind of stop frame kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Did it change how you went about setting up the blocking and the framing, especially given it was in 3D?
The 3D definitely had an impact on that. We're very conscious of the way you cut off the character with the edge of the frame, that kind of stuff. But not really in terms of staging. We had a really fluid process, and we were able to experiment a lot, which was a real luxury. So yeah, in that sense, it was pretty similar to other films in that you could get in there with the characters, block out the motion, shoot it, have a look, talk to the directors, and then keep iterating until we had something that everyone was happy with.
Were you floating a window to give you more stereo depth into the space?
That was done as a post process after the lensing. So yeah.
So in terms of those lenses, is there a natural correlation to real lenses, or did you just sort of make up your own versions?
No, we have proxies, I guess, for real world lenses.
So depth of field would be accurate to those real world lenses, or just your own?
Yeah, we had accurate depth of field. We had the luxury of being able to turn it on and off at the hit of a button, so it was really easy for us to compose the shots as we wanted to, and then worry about the depth of field almost as the second step.
Because in a stereo point of view, one might say, well, you don't really want to have a huge amount of depth of field because I can look around the screen because it's in stereo. But as a miniature, you want the exact opposite. You want heaps of to give away depth.
And actually, when you're focusing the audience to look at the convergence point with that depth of field, that really helps a lot with the stereo. I think it lets you go a little bit deeper because you don't have that problem where people are looking around as much all over the place. Everything's focused to the place where you naturally want to look.
So there are shots where the action is 2s, might even be 3s, I couldn't tell, but the camera work isn't.
Yeah.
Which of course defeats the render advantage of 2sing in the first place. Yeah. Did you ever look at trying to step the actual frames as opposed to just stepping the animation within them?
Yeah, we had a look at it. We played with a lot of variations, and that was always a conversation between animation and the layout department. Most of the time it was fine. Sometimes if the character's really close, animated on 2s, and then the camera was doing something, a smooth kind of elegant move into it, you start to become aware The biggest tell was the depth of field popping. You'd have to really work the focus every single frame to make sure that it wouldn't. And even then, you'd get a little bit of swimming with the focus. So, yeah, it was. It was a case-by-case basis. There wasn't a formula to answer that question. It was just, we'd look at each shot as it came, discuss with animation if there's any leeway there, or. But yeah, it was never a huge problem. It was never a deal breaker. We always found a solution to
How do you approach virtual cinematography? Do you say, I can get this camera to pivot on its nodal point and it's perfect because that's what I can do? Or do you say, you know what, I want to make it feel slightly imprecise to get for the fact that the nodal pivot point is off-center with, say, a tripod?
It depends, again, case by case. But personally, I think whatever you can do to get away from that nodal pivot is really helpful. There's a subconscious language of cinema that people are used to, and I think 3D cinematography can sometimes be a little bit too, as you're talking about, all on one axis and all pivoting from the same place. And it's quite powerful when you can get away from that. We had some virtual Steadicam rigs. They're all keyframe animated. There wasn't any live capture, but we used those to great effect, I think, to really make you feel like there was a camera operator there. And that stuff, when it can be really, really powerful.
And yet I didn't really see you going heavily into hunt and seek on focus or framing. You stayed away from looking kind of obviously.
Yep.
So there must be a line there of sort of becoming aware of that and not.
Yeah, and these are all the things that we kind of developed as the style of the film as we went. I mean, we started off trying to overshoot with the focus a little bit, and it just, because the depth of field is so extreme, you're just so aware of it that we pretty quickly shut that down, and focus was perfect, but we'd overshoot with the motion of the camera and trying to give the camera weight. That was one of the trickiest things on this film. And it's actually one of the biggest things to give scale as well, because what 3D cameras like to do is to interpolate very smoothly and perfectly. And that takes all the weight out. So a lot of the time we were trying to imagine how big the camera would be that we were using here and how far could you actually move that on a table and what would that look like relative to the minifigs. And essentially what that gives you is a kind of quite big steps in the increments. Even when the camera's moving and going to a stop, we didn't want it to be too smooth. We'd always be pushing to see how far we can make it feel organic and real.
So contrasting with that restraint, were there any other scenes where you went the other way and tried to get, more movement in, or handheld kind of vibe? Or
Yeah. There's one scene in particular, which is a scene where Emmett's being interrogated, and it comes kind of towards the start of the film. But at that point in the movie, we've only had quite formal, very locked off, as you said, cameras. And this is it's the first moment where Emmett kind of realises something bad is happening to him. So we really tried to push that in terms of having handheld cameras and giving the audience a sense of uneasiness, a kind of subconscious uneasiness. So that was a real challenge. That's one of the sequences we use a lot of the virtual Steadicam rigs. What properties did that virtual Steadicam give you that you wouldn't have got from just drawing a vector in space and moving the camera along? So it gives you a much more nervous feeling. And hopefully the effect that we would get is that the audience will subconsciously feel that. So they'll, rather than having a very locked off camera where everything feels safe and ordered, the camera is moving a lot and like correcting and adjusting. It gives it kind of a nervous intensity, hopefully.
And is it literally pivoted like a Steadicam with an axis point way lower than the camera?
Yeah, it was. It was, so you'd be moving lower, pivoting from kind of essentially a hip level on a minifig. So it was like a little minifig Steadicam operator. It was pretty cute, actually.
So the animation in this kind of feels like you've achieved a lot incredibly successfully, but it's like you had one arm tied behind your back from an animation point of view. You're not allowed to do the sort of things that squash and stretch, secondary follow-on animation. There's no bits of moving clothing to sort of rustle and stuff. I mean, was it just really hard to animate these? It looks so simple.
Well, surprisingly enough, despite all of the restraint, as you said, the end result's beautiful and it works really, really well. And I think one of the really interesting things about the design problem or the creative problem is being true to the medium. So Lego is such a creative medium. There's so many things you can do with it, as is evidenced by its duration and its long-standing history with kids and everything. And I think that really came to the fore when we started doing animation. So despite the fact that you don't have squash and stretch and you don't have all these amazing kind of antics to sell stuff, there's a sort of a truth to the medium in that when you start to animate these things, they're like your imagination. It's like you're playing with the minifigs, and you really get a sense of these guys being little characters that are in your mind. So despite the restraint and despite the sort of what seems to be a lack of tools to be able to create this amazing animation, it ended up being quite the opposite. One of the other things too that was really, really important is that we gave the animators the ability to start to put their own bricks into their shots. So rather than really us defining up front what was in a shot sort of in its entirety, some of the tools would enable the animators to bring bricks in and build little things, and you ended up with this, great kind of supporting cast of just incidental stuff that was really quite exciting to see and very creative.
You could pull almost any facial expression as I'm going to say UV map on a face.
Sure.
You couldn't kind of shrug or tilt a head in anywhere near the way you can on a normal character.
Well, it's funny because the guys would want to do a shrug. So it'd be like, okay, well, how are we going to do a shrug? And they would inevitably come up with some strange combination of an arm move and a torso and a head tilt that would imply a shrug. And when you were looking at the performance, you'd immediately get it as a shrug. But it wasn't just your standard kind of, okay, you've got a collarbone and you give it some of this and that's your shrug. It was a really nice creative combination of all the bits while working around that kind of truth to the medium,
There's some flames that come out of the bottom of a seat or an apparatus or something. And I was looking at that and I was saying, well, normally that'd be the FX team, right? They just produce a fluid sim or a gaseous slim and stuff. But here, because it wasn't that, I was wondering, was that sort of what I would call effects animation done by a traditional animator? Yep. Or was the effects guys having to just feed everything through some kind of pixelization, blocky voxel thing? Yeah, well, it was a really nice combination of the two. So I mentioned before the animators had the ability to sort of bring bricks into their scene, and sometimes they would. So if, for example, you had a fight scene and one character hits another, the animator could say, there's a little magic wand brick that we could use as a spark that comes off the face of the character, and they had the ability to go and pull those bricks in completely arbitrarily. Now, on the other hand, there might be some very heavy effects work to do. So say there was the street caught on fire, the effects artist would actually have particle simulations that would produce those bricks. So the bricks would be appearing, randomly and doing the animation that they defined as a particle simulation. So there were two very distinct kind of workflows, but the same creative result, which is like it's all brick based, it's all true to the medium, and it's controlled, as a brick moving in space. So on paper, you'd think it was an easier render because it's hard surfaces, though I noticed quite a lot of transparency. So I'm assuming subsurface in those materials that warranted it.
Yeah.
Was it an easy render?
No. Perhaps the most difficult thing about this is the geometric complexity. So everybody, when you say Lego, you kind of think to yourself, the standard Lego brick, which is a 3x2 or whatever it is, and that in everybody's mind, that's what Lego is. But these days, Lego is so incredibly complex. There's so much detail in those bricks. There's an internal structure to them. There's there's the little Lego logo on the top of it. Now, all of that stuff is, I reckon, is permanently imprinted in our brains. Like we know when you see a Lego brick that doesn't look like a Lego brick. So not only is the geometric detail highly complicated, but the actual material itself. So there's subsurface scatter going on in all of the bricks to a varying degree. There's obviously transparency, as you pointed out. So there's a huge amount of complexity in the shading. Now, because we were true to medium and we really, really didn't want to cheat the brick nature of the film, everything in the film is made out of bricks. So that means even the background stuff is effectively brick made. Now, we had to work out ways to optimize our renders so that we could cull 99% of the geometry that's actually there. So all of that internal detail, all of the stud detail, all that kind of stuff. So while we're true to the medium, we're very, very efficient with the way that we select the geometry that we're going to render. So it was a very, very difficult rendering problem, but at the end of the day, we got very, very good at it. And by the end of the film, I was saying to the Lego guys, I think we're the most efficient brick rendering, facility in the world, without a doubt. So yeah.
ever there was a film that I would have thought procedural stuff would be in play, to be this one. Was there just a bank of guys working out how to take an X model and reduce it procedurally to Lego?
Well, there were tools that did that, but that was more for our large-scale environments. So there's a scene there where we go through a canyon, and we have some incredible tools where you could build a surface, and then obviously our procedural tools would fill that with certain bricks, and then we could stratify that with different colours, and we had different layers of types of bricks and those kinds of things. And that was really helpful for those vast kind of environments. But when it comes to buildings and those types of things, there was none of it. We actually built all of that stuff very particularly, and there were guys there who actually constructed those things brick by brick.
So just walk me through the technical pipeline. So what were you effectively prevising or blocking out in, and then where did it move from that?
So at the very front of the pipeline, obviously there's some design and stuff, but we actually used an off-the-shelf Lego piece of software which anybody can download. It's called LDD, which is Lego Digital Designer. And that's a great tool set for building Lego, you know, not surprisingly. It is basically access to the Lego library. It controls Lego to Lego sticking, so snapping basically. And the guys would mock up, even in the art department, would mock up these kind of designs. And from that, we had an external library where we'd built subdivision versions of the bricks. Each one of the bricks was built by us, unique build, sub-D capable. We would then basically take the LDD model, convert that into a shell of multiple different types. So we had like a render shell, we had a display shell, we had a whole bunch of other different types of shells that could be used in different parts of the pipeline. And then from that, we would build the environment. We would also build characters and that kind of stuff. So at the very front end of the pipeline, we have a very brick-based approach. When we got into layout and those types of things, or for the environment, the guys would position all of the instances of various buildings around, and we would record that in our proprietary sort of format, which is effectively a config file that specifies where all the assets go. We would then construct all of those things into a shot for animation. They would get presented with the display versions of those shells, so that's all OpenGL optimized and those kinds of things. They would then animate in XSI, doing all the various animation. That would then come out of XSI and go into lighting or effects. When effects got it, they would go into Houdini. And as I said, this is all passing down the pipe in our geometry, proprietary geometry format. And as I said, it maintains the record of all the bricks that are in all those assets. When that gets into effects, they could turn around and they could take that shell and they could say, okay, well, we're going to blow this building up and we're going to turn it into bricks. So they would go back and sort of devolve that asset into its brick nature and blow all those bricks into pieces.
Which is an interesting problem in of itself, right? Because you want to blow on brick lines. Did you actually shatter bricks at any point?
No, never.
So it was always a matter of staying true to that volume.
Yeah.
And presumably the physics of that is quite particular.
Yeah, very particular. And there was a lot of simulations. I'm sure everybody will start to see some of the simulations that we were doing at the start of the project to really get that sense of, because when you smash your Lego building, it doesn't sort of devolve into just bricks. Little sections of it will come apart, and then, you know, other bits will have, like, all the little detail bricks will fall off on their own.
But is it a pre-break strategy, or were you going for something else?
No, the guys in effects actually did a very sort of accurate representation of the kind of stickiness of all the bricks, and they would break apart on a very random type scenario based on the kind of the build structure. So if you had like a wall that was built, you know, as you're supposed to build them with interleaving things, that would stay quite rigid. But if you built them in big long lines, then they'd fall apart and sort of disperse as you'd expect. Yeah, so it was really quite accurate. Yeah.
Wow. And then the rendering pipe, you've traditionally had a RenderMan pipe that you've built on.
Yep. So as I said, the rendering problem was really unique. The kind of geometric detail that we're talking about was massive. So we knew that we had to have, we were going to have some problems, or problems that obviously we needed to focus on optimization. That optimization came in the form of a sort of proprietary renderer that we were initially going to use as a ray tracing accelerator for PRMan. But as we sort of moved into production, and the guys, particularly Max Liani and a guy called Luke Emrose, as they started to develop this accelerator for PRMan, it became apparent that we could actually take it into a primary renderer. So we started to push our internal renderer to animation and layout, and we would render with this sort of proprietary renderer.
What was it that you were getting out of your proprietary renderer that you weren't getting out of a, you know, state-of-the-art PRMan? Because PR Man has got a lot of versatility, has a physically based plausible shading and lighting models.
Yep. I mean, I think as with anything that's proprietary, the beauty of a proprietary software is while it has a certain amount of overhead in terms of development and those kinds of things, you only develop it specifically for the things that you need at that time. So it has the functions that are specific to the problem that you're dealing with at that moment. And that really came to the fore in this instance. Like Lego is a very particular problem.
But would the renderability be valid going on to other projects?
Yes. Yeah,
Right.
so it's a lucky situation in that we got the chance to sort of develop this renderer with what is seemingly a small subset of rendering problems, i.e. geometric complexity. The material side of things is relatively contained in that it's a Lego material. We don't have to do fur and we don't have to do all these different types of things, cloth and those kinds of things. It literally is plastic of different colours and different opacity and all sorts of effectively the Lego kind of paradigm. We developed some incredible tools to enable the lighters to do a key shot, and then you could apply that light rig to many of the other shots and get a really, really good result. So that process was really interesting because you could optimize the lighting artists. They could really deal with hundreds of shots quite easily.
I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but before the trailers came out, there was a sort of a skepticism of how this is going to work. There'd been commercials with animated Lego pieces. It seems to me that it was the power of the performances and the humour that you got in that trailer that caused it, as we're talking, to have, I think, a 98% rating on Rotten Tomatoes in terms of people wanting to see the film. So did you always know that you were going to hit the right beats, or was there a moment before it was released where you were going, good God, I hope people actually buy into this?
No, I don't think you ever know. I think internally everybody was really excited by the project, and it's funny when you're in the heart of it and you're in the middle of the production and stuff, and Lego more so than any project that I've ever worked on, there is a sense of what you're doing is enjoyable and fun and groundbreaking. Happy Feet, Guardians, all those things. They have elements of it that are different and new. And in this case, and Lego was no different. It was like while we were in the middle of it, it felt like something new and something different. And the animators were having an incredibly good time about it. Everybody was really enjoying the process. And I think when those first trailers came out and people started to question whether or not it was CG or whether or not it was stop motion, there was high fives all around because basically, for the first time, there was an animated film where people didn't actually know how we'd done it. And I think that was really, really. It was a really pleasant surprise for everybody involved. There was and seeing the kind of feedback that we got was just icing on the cake for the work that was currently happening internally, and it really got the kind of energy levels going up and stuff. It's been an interesting project in that regard. Yeah.
The film has really distinctive environments. I mean, really quite distinctive, and yet your, paintbrushes to work with seem somewhat limited in the sense you've got to use the same construction materials each time out. How'd you go about getting that sense of different environments, and was it just as simple as colour?
It was a matter of using colour, but also sometimes unique bricks and obviously unique build styles depending on the environment. A lot of the environments we sort of travel through are fairly familiar, cities, Wild West locations and so on. And a lot of those environments also had essentially Lego builds that already existed for them in some respect. So,
but let's say you've got a canyon. Are you saying, I'm going to design this canyon with these bricks in mind? Or is it just like, that's a good design of a canyon, now some procedural model, go turn that into bricks?
It was a mixture of doing that, but also specifically simplifying the canyon designs down. We found, say if we were designing a landscape, if we just went in there and just essentially modelled a realistic landscape and just filled it full of bricks, it ended up looking very kind of aliased and noisy. And we ended up looking at a lot of sort of simplified impressionistic versions of mesas where they almost felt like the old Looney Tunes cartoons where there are much simpler shapes, and we would either fill those with bricks or in some cases create them as matte paintings so that we're creating landscapes that are sympathetic to the shapes of the bricks as opposed to simply taking an organic shape and filling it full of bricks.
So I've always been a huge fan of the effects animation guys in just adding production value. Like you had some smoke here, some atmospheres here, a bunch of stuff like that. You can really sell a shot, make it grand, make it look expensive. But you don't have that luxury quite so much because like a lot of the smoke literally is blocked into sort of Lego pieces and stuff. But it did seem you were using glares and flares and stuff to get some of that atmosphere. Can you talk about that process of giving it a reality, given that you just couldn't use maybe some of the normal tricks?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously, most of the stuff was built out of Lego, including some of our hero effects, water and so on. But we deliberately wanted the film to feel atmospheric, as if it was a large-scale film, but shot on a much, much smaller scale. There's a photographer named Evano who does these beautiful photographs of Lego toys, and you can see them on the internet as a Flickr account. We actually talked to him, and he sort of described how Douglas Trumbull influenced his work by creating sort of essentially smoke tanks, or much, much smaller environments filled with much, much more atmosphere than you might otherwise have. And that's essentially the approach we took whilst doing the Lego movie. If we wanted to create atmospherics, we would put moats in that would be larger scale than you might have in a normal film. And we'd also pump the sets full of probably much more smoke than you might have in a normal movie. But that's what a DOP might do on a live action set as well, to create a sense of atmosphere and a sense of depth in the shot.
Yet the actual smoke plumes, like you blow something up, are very distinctively not that sort
built
of...
from Lego, exactly. You know, and so we would have to, you know, create those plumes out of transparent bricks sometimes and backlight them, so you might actually get that effect of that you might get in real smoke, where it's actually
It's very
glowing.
binary, isn't it? It's like it's there or it's not. You don't get to fade it off.
No.
And like just the idea of fading out some smoke is just, you know, 101 stuff, and yet you can't even do that.
Yeah, the effects guys had to sometimes fade through various levels of colours, as if we were doing this on a live action stop motion set. You might go from dark grey to light grey, and then light grey to transparent white, and then white to clear, and then nothing. Sometimes we would actually do it via the size of the bricks. So you'd start with a big brick and then cycle through down to smaller and smaller bricks. And that was a way of creating the effect of something fading off without literally fading it off.
The studs on the Lego pieces define very much where pieces connect to other pieces. So not only are you restricted to blocks, but how those blocks, and in fact how those characters or props sit on the landscape, is quite sort of dictated to by the studs, assuming you kept to that, Rob.
Yeah, where possible, in close-up shots, obviously we kept to it because you could tell where stuff was intersecting. And we went through a whole QC process where we would point out just intersections and so on and try and resolve those either in modeling or in animation. The thing about Lego, and the thing that makes it interesting to me in terms of the way you build with it, is it's all about context. So when you're up close on something, if you put a banana in someone's hand and it's yellow, then it looks like a banana, and then you can actually take that banana and stick a couple of studs on the end of it and it looks like a gun. So it's this interesting process of depending on how you use these bricks and depending on what context you use them, totally changes the way you perceive them in a story.
From a production design point of view, is it harder being faced with the job of I need a city or I need inside Emmett's brain in a sort of a ethereal landscape?
I think the ethereal landscape is always more difficult. That went through a whole bunch of discussion. Not a huge amount of actual design work. We actually talked about the concepts on that one a lot more than we actually drew it. And we went down all these sort of interesting paths from, you know, the Matrix Dojo kind of world to a world where it's just all the part numbers floating around, and that actually evolves into another concept which we use in the movie later on. And eventually, you know, Chris and Phil said, look, all we want is simplicity. It needs to be kind of impressive but simple. Dumbpressive is a word that Phil used in the making of it, in terms of it should be, you know, incredibly simple to the point where it seems dumb, but also really, really visually impressive. And that's when we started looking at, you know, photography on salt lakes and things that are stark and simple, and created essentially a salt lake for Emmett's mind, where it was deliberately empty, but lit with these transparent underlit bricks, so that it had like a sense of beauty and might have been able to hint at something more in Emmett's personality.
Because I think the rendering really delivered you a good sort of contribution there, because it is visually pretty impressive from a render point of view. There's like that much transparency and that much light moving around, and yet you're right, it's flat and nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it was that scene entirely was hinged on the lighting and shading in terms of the look. And honestly, Like when we were pitching the concept, we were like, oh, we're going to be able to pull this one off. And surprisingly, with the sort of new rendering technology we developed in-house, we're actually able to pull that off much, much quicker than we thought in terms of getting results that were rendering on ones, not just every 10 frame, but actually fully animated without noise really, really early on in the process.
In an animated film like this, does the character costume, propping and stuff all fall under you in production design, or was there a separate team that we'd call? Because there's not really cloth sims or anything else like that, but of course there is wardrobe and character design.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of areas where we did character design. Initially, it was the art department, where we would come up with decals for custom characters or mix and match pre-existing decals on Lego characters. The Lego company also contributed some of the design work on some of the background characters. But later on, as the production was flowing, animation had the ability to create their own characters if they wanted to, and effects created characters as well. So all the background characters in Cloud Cuckoo Land were sort of randomly generated with mixing and matching decals and various hair pieces like a kid might do. Or if an animator wanted to come up with a new character, they might call up, the doctor over here and then give him a different hairstyle or her a different hairstyle in a shot, depending on their needs. So there were various departments who were able to actually create and contribute to the movie throughout the process.
So the team that flowed out from that, were they making just a ton of stock, for example, hair pieces, in the Lego sense that you would just grab one and stick it on? Or was it much more that things were very much designed just for when they would be needed and for what they were needed for? Yeah,
there were sort of two levels in terms of asset design and surfacing and shading. One was actually building stuff on the brick level, i.e. building the bricks themselves, and the second level was then actually building things where those bricks come together. So modelers had to spend a long, tedious amount of time actually sort of reproducing the bricks that we got the CAD data directly from Lego, and they would have to essentially remodel them in such a way that they became usable in the production in the pipeline. And then later on, those same artists might then be given the task of designing a car or coming up with what a set might look like based on a sketch. Simultaneously in the art department.
It has to be a car operated by a character that has a...
Oh, yeah, one of the things we had to force ourselves to do was to actually embrace the limitations of the medium as opposed to trying to cram the medium into some idea of what we thought it should do. So, we actually thought it was kind of cute that rather than Emmett actually having his fingers wrap around the steering wheel and do that, his hands were deliberately away from the steering wheel and he drove it as if a real Lego character would do it. That was a sort of big part of learning how to actually make the movie, was learning to dumb it down a little bit and not overthink some of these concepts.
And don't forget, we rely on your support via our Insider program. As an Insider member, you allow us to do shows just like this one. And we try and say thanks by posting bonus exclusive content for Insider members. So check it out on the homepage at fxguide.com. Well, that's it for now. Until next time, see ya. For more industry news, in-depth features, podcasts and forums, check out fxguide.com. And for visual effects training, check out fxphd.com.